Uh, I would like to say just a few words while our speakers are taking their seats. If you want, you can move there. I just wanted to share with you as an early read of the book, because I got a copy even before the book was in the bookshops. And I read it in the summer, and I just thought that it's interesting to think about the book as in terms of its potential readership. Who would be the kind of people who would be interested in this book? And I think that more obviously, anyone who wants to really understand what has happened with Russia in the last 25 years under the Putin regime would find this book extremely important. But I also think, and probably because I read the book at this moment in the summer, I was in England, there were all sorts of things happening there at the time, that on one level, the book is also about the mechanisms that an authoritarian regime uses. And, you know, nowadays, of course, we're all worried about the way that liberal and democratic values are under threat in authoritarian states like Russia. But it is also impossible not to notice in the ways in which they're being undermined within Western democracies as well. And therefore, I think that the book would be interesting also to people who may not necessarily want to learn just about Russia, but are interested and concerned about various other things happening these days in the world. And so I just wanted to read to you 2 sentences from the book. I promise, it's only 2. At one point in the book, they talk about my hero, Anna Politkovskaya, a Russian journalist who was assassinated at the beginning of the 2000s. And they say there, she wrote about things people were afraid to talk about. She kept writing her stories even when the public did not want to read them. So on this note, I'm going to leave you with Mirjana.
Thank you very much, Clemena. Good evening, everyone. And I do thank Clemena and Antonova for inviting me to moderate this book presentation. Not only have I read and enjoyed the book, I am personally interested in the book because as a former journalist and a war reporter, I have lived in my country of origin, my city of Belgrade, something similar. People took different sides. Some supported the war, but then there are differences. And my name is Mirjana Tomic, and I curate and moderate seminars on politics and media in Europe for Forum Journalismus und Medien and for Presseclub Concordia. Welcome. I think this is the second time you're my guests, and that is why I have 2 books here, and I will explain why I see the connection. This is the one we shall talk about today, and this is the previous one. So let me introduce our speakers, Andrei Soldatov and Irina Borogan.
Borogan.
I practice.
Right.
I practice. Both born in Moscow about 50 years ago. I'm not being indiscreet. I think it is important the way you chronologically follow the story to know which generation you belong to. They're both investigative journalists and specialists in Russian security services. They met while working in the newspaper Сегодня and stayed together as partners and collaborators.
That's true.
It was about 25 years ago, at the time when Vladimir Putin became Russia's president for the first time. They are co-founders of the website Agentura RU, specialized in monitoring security services. Together and separately, they have covered major tragedies and events that happened in Russia, from Dubrovka theater hostage-taking, Beslan school siege, protests in 2010 and 2011, and many other events. In many cases, official Moscow lied about the number of victims, and silence rescue operation mistakes. Some of your colleagues were willing not to tell the truth of what happened, and this was a long time ago, long before the beginning of the war in Ukraine. I would also like to remind the audience that the designation of foreign agent began in 2012. It didn't start with the war in Ukraine. Irina also covered some foreign wars, including the NATO bombardment of Yugoslavia. They worked for various media in Moscow, and FSB tracked their work and interrogated them. In 2005, they published their first book in English in the US, and ever since, their books have been very successful internationally, and I think in Russia as well, those that were translated. Since 2021, they live in London, and it was not their choice to leave Russia and settle abroad. Andrei and Irina have authored the following books: New Patriot Games, How Secret Services Have Been Changing Their Skin, 1991 to 2004. The New Nobility, The Restoration of Russia's Security State and the Enduring Legacy of KGB. The Red Web, The Struggle Between Russia's Digital Dictators and New Online Revolutionaries. The Compatriots, The Brutal and Chaotic History of Russia's Exiles, Emigres, and Agents Abroad. Our Dear Friends in Moscow. This is the one from 2012. One thing that you didn't seem to coincide is Irina was proclaimed foreign agent in September 25, and Andrei 2 years earlier. And so this didn't happen simultaneously, and you're unfortunately now on the most wanted list. The format of the conversation will be the following. We shall be talking for about 30 minutes, and then the audience is invited to ask questions. I'll just say a few things about the work and go straight to questions. Our Dear Friends in Moscow, the inside story of a broken generation, describes how some of their fellow journalists in Russia came to accept Vladimir Putin's government and support for the war, not silently, actively. As propagandists, the book begins in the first years of Vladimir Putin's presidency, when the two journalists are working for the newspaper Sevodnya, and then when they are living in exile. It describes a personal history, personal journey, as well as the trajectory of a group of highly educated, multilingual, well-traveled journalists who have spent the first part of their professional lives as critical journalists and then turned into propaganda. I was going to go further, but let me start with the first question. Which one of you would like to introduce the main protagonists of your book and explain why did you choose the people you chose? That's the first question. And two, I assume not everyone became a propagandist among the people with whom you worked, talked, and drank a lot of vodka. That comes from the book. But Andrei wrote that he doesn't drink, so I don't know if Irina drank everything for both of you.
It's a challenge. First of all, thank you for inviting us, and it's a privilege to talk here about our book. This book is different from our previous books. It's much more personal, and for a reason. We started thinking about writing this book immediately after the beginning of the full-scale invasion in February 2022 for one main reason. We didn't understand, and we wanted to find an answer, why so many people in the country, and we are not talking about ordinary Russians brainwashed by propaganda living in some villages. We are talking about essentially Russian elites, why these people decided to support the war and to support Putin. And you might try to approach this topic while using different techniques. If you are a scientist or a researcher, you can try to analyze lots of data, but we are journalists. So we wanted to find a group of people who might help to find the answer to this question. And we ended up thinking about people who used to be our really good friends when we started our careers as journalists. All of us met in Izvestia in 2000 when Putin just became president. And we fall apart probably around Moscow protests in 2011, 2012. But for this book, we decided that we need to reconnect with them and to talk to them, to try to understand their reasons. So who are these people? When we met at political department of Izvestia, and our chief was Evgeny Krutikov, who seemed to be living always in the shadow of his great family. His great-granddad was deputy prime minister under Stalin, and his father was a very prominent Russian, back then, Soviet spy. And Krutikov always was fascinated by his family story, but also by Russian intelligence agencies. I learned a lot from him. Well, there was also Petya Kopov, who was a kind of maverick, very intelligent guy, always obsessed with really strange things. For instance, he collected North Korean stamps. He had a huge library, mostly books about North Korea in China, and he knew a lot about these countries. He had a very interesting wife, and that is why we always, we spent a lot of time in his apartment, where we met his very close friend, Evgeny Baranov, who was a very prominent, at the time, war correspondent, a very brave one. He covered the Second Chechen War at the time and several wars before, and we admired him because he was a really good journalist. Later on, he introduced all of us, this group, to his wife, and a very interesting girl, which was very liberal and a funny girl, also with a very interesting Soviet pedigree. She came from a family of very, very famous Russian actor, Kachalov, and there is a street named after him in Moscow, and everyone in Russia knows his name because there is a poem written by Sergei Yesenin, which actually is about the dog of Kachalov, what is why it's a household name. So she was extremely liberal, and we, as you said, we drank together, spent a lot of time together, but most importantly, we believed at the time that we were on the same page professionally. And because it was a time, the early 2000s, when we saw, sorry, I forget another character, so I need to add her name. Svetlana Babaeva was not a close friend, but we spent a lot of time together because she was also a journalist at the political department of Izvestia, and she was what we call a journalist of a presidential pool. It means that she was part of a group of journalists who always accompanied the president, and she started with Yeltsin, and she started following Putin as well. And she spent a lot of time with Vladimir Putin. She was that kind of political animal. Anyway, we spent a lot of time together, sometimes in very difficult places. We covered terrorist attacks together. We were in Beslan with Baranov and Krutikov together. We found ourselves together in Lebanon when the war between Israel and Lebanon started in 2006. And we believed for many years that although there were differences between the way we saw the world, at least professionally we were on the same page. We respected each other. They supported us when we found ourselves in trouble with the FSB. For instance, Baranov helped us to talk on the air of his TV channel about what we found out about the FSB operation to release hostages in Nordos, which was a disaster. Petya Kopov helped us to publish our big report about the changes in counterterrorism tactics of the FSB following the Beslan disaster. Krutikov helped us with his advice and connections. But then, well, eventually we all split, and it was quite dramatic. I would say, and I would stop here, that the moment when we understood that we couldn't talk to each other was the moment of the Moscow protest, when Petya Akopov published a list of the enemies of people, and we all understood by 2011 that if you end up on such a list, it means you are in trouble. Well, there was already a list of journalists attacked and killed in the country. It was already quite long by 2011. And he put our names, our names on this list.
He reposted the list.
Yeah, he reposted this list, and that's
create it.
Yeah, he did write it, but he reposted the list, and both of our names were on this list. And at that moment, we believed that, well, because he went so personal, it would be impossible for us to talk. But for the book, we reconnected with most of these people. Only one person refused to talk to us. It was this girl, a former wife of Evgeny Baranov, who became Minister of Culture. She pretended that, well, when I called her, she pretended to be her press office, so she didn't reply. Two people, Baranov and Krutikov, Akopov and Krutikov, agreed to talk to us for hours and hours and hours. So the book is as a result of these conversations and of what we remember and what we understood about this journey of 25 years Russia went through.
Thank you. Irina, let's just go back for a second. You said during one interview that you belong to a happy generation. In other words, you believed democracy was possible. You believed changes were possible. I would like to ask you, what do you mean by the happy generation, and why did you think it was possible overnight to introduce or to become democratic in a country that doesn't have a very long democratic tradition, if any? Why were you so optimistic?
That's true, but I said that we are the first happy generation in the 20th century in Russia, because the century was terrible. The whole Europe went through two terrible wars: the First World War and the Second World War. But in Russia, there were the Russian Revolution between two terrible wars. There was the Civil War and Stalin repression between that. The only people who started living kind of normal life were our parents, who were born after the war, after the Second World War. But their life was limited in all. I'm not talking only about their lives were limited politically. They could not express themselves in public. They could not discuss politics. They could not discuss many things, including Western arts, many movies, and something like that. They could not travel abroad. They were not allowed to set up their businesses. They were not allowed to make money. And I remember all that when I was a little girl, and when I went to primary school. I remember that the teachers, they were formidable. I always been in trouble with them and I didn't do anything terrible. I did not try to set up my teacher on fire like my friend did. I just, the maximum I did, I asked them questions, and I tried to discuss something they already said, and it was considered as a huge sin. And then perestroika happened, and when I became a teenager, perestroika was in full bloom, and step by step, we found out that we are allowed to do anything. I mean, nobody pay attention in school what clothes you were wearing. You can wear makeup, and what was important for me, Western music, movies, everything just came coming to the country every day, literally. And for me, it looks like we lived in white and black movie, and then just colors appeared. And for me, it was very precious that the new principle was sent to my school, and he was the last one was just a lady fired, or just I don't remember what happened to her. The new principal was liberal, and they called him a new democratic director. And he was a historian teacher, and we had a lot of discussion with him, and we both were happy. It was political discussion. We talked about history, about literature, about Gulag, about repression, about music, about everything, and we were happy both. So, and then the 90s came, and everything became, it was kind of traumatic and painful for older people, like my parents. They lost all their savings, their salaries, their engineers, their salaries became very, very small. But I was 16, when the Soviet Union collapsed, I was 16 years old, so I didn't care a lot about money. And what I care a lot was that I'm allowed to do anything. Nightclubs appeared at every corner. Music, there were a lot of. Western movies, everything was allowed. And my friends who were interested in money, they could set up new businesses. And many people, and many of them did in their early 20s or even earlier. Some people who were not interested to do their own business, they could find job at Western or foreign companies which came in Moscow, many of them. But I was interested in journalism, so it was a blast. It was a blast of media in the country. There was a lot of newspapers, TV channels, and you could join to any of them. It wasn't like, like in Europe or in the United States or in the United Kingdom. Of course, there were some specifics. Most of independent media was owned by oligarchs. Some were state media. They were very, very boring. But if you were not interested in liberalism or boring states, producing boring state stuff, you could join a nationalistic, crazy patriotic, they called them patriotic papers. You wouldn't be paid well, but there was an option. So freedom of expression and freedom of doing whatever you want. It was euphoric feeling for young people.
To what extent this euphoria and this atmosphere that you had just wonderfully described was present only in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and some big cities?
Absolutely true. I'm talking only about Moscow. I know the Moscow life very well, and of course, for my relatives in Russia provinces, that wasn't the same.
Well, I'm not a Russia expert, but I discovered when I was in Moscow that people that I talked to in English would say in Moscow and in Russia. So it was like there is Moscow and then there is the rest. I would like to, you mentioned traveling. There is a sentence in your book where you describe that in the Soviet Union, the only ones who could travel to countries that are not Bulgaria, and I'm not sure which other one, they were the spies, they were diplomats, and I guess very important artists. And the characters, your protagonists, all belong to these categories. And you mentioned them as an elite. I'm wondering, where average Russians, did they admire this elite or they hated this elite? Do you admire spies? And I also have the feeling from your previous book that spying is some sort of a hereditary profession. Many spies had children who were later spies, and grandchildren who were spies, etc. Could you explain these spies and intelligence or security services? What is their role? Did people only fear them or admire them as well, and saw them as a sort of a mobility ladder?
I would say it's a bit more complicated. In many Russian, even liberal families, if you talk to these people, you can find that in some of these families, they're quite proud of the ancestors who...
Who served Stalin, for example.
Yeah, or some artists, for instance, or some journalists. Even today, they are quite proud of having someone in their families who served in Soviet intelligence in the 1940s or 1930s. I think part of the reason is because there was such a huge change of elites at the time, and because of repressions, because of the revolution, all the
You
Russian...
mean, speaking of the Bolshevik Revolution?
Yes, I'm talking about the Bolshevik Revolution. Well, the traditional Russian elite either was destroyed or well expelled, and the new elite emerged. And this elite was very different. There were intellectuals, sometimes there were spy intellectuals, sometimes it was a mix of things. Many of them finally were repressed and killed, and that created this image that you had something very big and great and tragic in your family. And that makes you feel bigger about your family and about your space in society. For instance, with one of the protagonists, Yevgeny Krutikov, his father was a young Soviet spy who was promoted by his father, who was at the time was deputy prime minister, and he was assigned to the embassy in France. And when Stalin died, apparently things went south for many Soviet spies because there was a rumor and there was a sense of uneasiness that might be the new guy. Whoever would replace Stalin would either change the rules of the game or start a new mass repressions. And that caused lots of Soviet spies to defect and at the same time caused a huge paranoia in Soviet intelligence. So Krutikov's father was arrested and sent to Gulag, and he spent lots of years there. Finally, he got released. The interesting thing that he found a way back to the Russian elites because of his ancestry, because of his dad, because the family was so important. The interesting thing was that when I asked Krutikov during our conversations, do you feel yourself and your family a victim of Stalin repressions? He said no, because my father was repressed after Stalin died, and apparently for him, that created strange psychological thing that actually he felt so proud of his family that in a way that justified for him Stalin himself, because it was Stalin who gave this status to his family. So in many elite families in Moscow, people have really mixed feelings about spies. But of course, we need to understand that Russian and Soviet intelligence and security services were so huge that you need to identify what part of the security services you talk about. If we are talking about people who conducted repressions in the country, of course, everybody hated them and were afraid of them. But if we are talking about people who were...
Killing outside the country?
Yes. And at some point, that was, to be honest, the topic of our previous book. We tried to understand why actually the Russian foreign intelligence was never reformed. The reason was that they found a way how to explain to the Russian public and to Russian society but actually spies were the most liberal part of the KGB because we were exposed to Western world. And this idea was promoted, this narrative was promoted by Russian intelligence agencies, and surprisingly it was accepted by Russian society. And even now, if you talk to people, they would say, yeah, KGB was bad, but spies were different.
I understand. Irina, I would like to make a connection between these two books, although I recommend both of them, and between the story of some of your protagonists. When I was reading The Compatriots, which is a book about Russian exiles and spies abroad, one thing that struck me was that people from very different social and economic backgrounds, from different waves of immigration, agreed to cooperate with intelligence. And I was wondering, was it Mother Russia? What is it that motivated them? And maybe I am extrapolating what you want to say in your book, but I have the feeling that some of your protagonists who changed sides, they did the same thing. They put Russia my motherland, right or wrong, above any sort of values. Because from what I understood in your book, they didn't do it for money. They did it out of beliefs. Could you explain what beliefs are those? What is it that, why do they justify the Ukrainian war? And there is one point that also that you mentioned either in the book or in one of your interviews, that a lot of them now believe that Russia can only be run as a dictatorship, that Russia cannot be. So yesterday's liberals now believe that Russia can only be. Which one would you please start, Irina?
That's complicated. Most of our main characters are a little bit older than us, so they started their adult life already in the Soviet Union, and they felt nostalgic for the Soviet Union when we knew them. We never felt nostalgic for the Soviet Union, but that's not like that love communism or socialism. They did not, and they don't. They love the status of superpower when Soviet Union had and Russia did not. And partly their motivations of what they're doing, that's a nostalgia for status of superpower. Another part of their motivations is that, I mean, to live in an authoritarian country and to be a dissident, to be against the authority is very, very hard. You will ruin your career. You will never be successful. You will never be rich or just wealthy.
Excuse me, from the beginning of the book, you also mentioned how important it is to have access to Kremlin. Please go ahead.
And to be successful journalist, and they all started their careers as journalists, you need access to the Kremlin. And to have access to the Kremlin, you have to be, I mean, in a good terms with the Kremlin. These people, they are all very, very ambitious people. They wanted to make their careers. They wanted to be successful. They wanted to be prominent, and they wanted to get their place in history. So that's why they sided with the Kremlin, and that's why they gradually they were not like that. I can't remember that 25 years ago they were ready to justify mass killings. They never supported mass killings in Chechnya. I don't remember that. But for the next 25 years, they gradually moved to the dark side, pursuing their careers, pursuing the dictator.
But why?
Because they wanted their place in history. They wanted to make successful careers. And otherwise, I mean, in the country like Russia, it is not
Does
impossible.
it mean that they write things they don't believe in?
They have never been brainwashed, so because they are brainwashers themselves. So that means that partly they believe what they are talking about, partly they follow the party line. So you can't tell. I mean, I guess that because they are all very supportive and pro-war, they should love Girkin, and Girkin was sent to prison, and no one say any word to defend him, to protect him. So I think they're kind of a very restricted and limited in what they're talking about, what they're allowed to talk and what they're not allowed to talk.
I will just a couple more questions. The very fact that I'm originally from Belgrade makes me very interested from one of your protagonists, Baranov. Mm-hmm. In Serbia, there is this myth of love for Russia, but first, no one really moves to Russia, no one speaks Russian, and only the ultra-nationalists talk about Russia without knowing the language, probably without having ever read a single Russian author. So, and you write in your book that Baranov didn't speak any foreign languages, but he was very tied to Serbian nationalists. First of all, how did they communicate? Second, what is it that tied them? What did he do there? Why was he so inspired? Why did his wife, or ex-wife, now the current Minister of Culture, why did she go to Belgrade on vacation and say, oh, I wish Russian intelligentsia understood what they do in Belgrade, basically lots of conspiracy theories. Why is it? Why this connection? And he's now, I should say, the head of the Ruski Dom, Russian house in Belgrade. He's Jewish, but he became very religious as an Orthodox, so it's all a bit difficult to understand rationally. And could you just explain to us, because this will be also sent, this recording to my friends in Belgrade, how come there was this close relations, and what did he expect? What did they collaborate? What was the basis of collaboration and admiration?
He speaks Serbian.
Yeah, he
Oh,
speaks
he
Serbian.
He speaks Serbian.
So there's no problem for him to communicate with Serbs. I think you might start to find to give a proper answer to this question. You need to start with a really big moment in recent Russian history. That was 1998, the economic crisis. And why it was different from all other economic problems Russia ever faced was that by 1998, you got lots of people in Moscow and St. Petersburg who became really successful, business-like. And they spoke all these languages, they started their new careers, and they considered themselves westernized and successful. And all of a sudden, they got such a huge hit. They got this crisis, and they started asking questions like, why on earth you told us that if we accept Western rules in our country, we would become successful. But actually we did, and we are ruined. We lost all our savings, just as people who were before us. But you told us before that all these people were losers because they didn't know what to do, because we were part of the military-industrial complex, because we were stupid Soviet people. But we are different. We are westernized. And you betrayed us yet again. And that's how the conspiracy theory started. But actually, the West was never serious about helping Russia. It was always about cheating. And then they just needed to find a way to channel this feeling of grievance and anger. And you got 1999. All of a sudden, and well, Irina reported from Belgrade. I
reported from Belgrade back then, and I remember that when I got back to Russia, I found a lot of sympathy for Serbians and a lot of hatred for NATO bombardment. So that was very, very, very common
just
sense.
clicked.
Yeah.
And well, Baranov started writing about things, making his documentaries, and I think around 1998, 1999, that time, and all of a sudden he found his audience. After that, it was just a matter of time for him to construct a conspiracy which became accepted now by many in the country, that you have this Western conspiracy against Russia and Slavic people in several stages. First, it was about conflicts in the former Soviet Union, and by the way, most of our protagonists spent some time in breakdown republics of Georgia and South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and they had a really big emotional attachment to these regions. Then you got Serbia. The next one was, of course, again, Georgia, 2008. Then you got Ukraine, color revolutions, and you just line all these things up, and you get your conspiracy. But by the time of Maidan crisis, 2014, it was already very well construed, and that's what was sold to the Russian public. But that time, the tone was so aggressive that it became...
What time exactly?
2014. And Baranov actually contributed a lot to this because he was producing lots of stuff about Maidan, and that was part of the Western conspiracy. And at that moment, 2014, this new language of Russian television was invented. It's a really strange mix of completely, sometimes not really connected elements, which were united only with one thing, that there is a Western conspiracy and a lot of aggressive language.
Before I opened the floor to the audience, yesterday, your former colleague, or still Alexei Kovalyov, published an article in published an article, I'm not sure, I read it today, and he claims that the West thinks that maybe the future of Russia is liberal, but at the same time, on different Telegram channels, ultra-nationalists, more nationalists, let's say, than the current government, are heavily criticizing corruption in the Russian military. And to what extent the generals are stealing and how they are directing the different operations. He thinks that maybe the next generation will be even more nationalistic, and he's talking about people who are pro-war. I'm wondering, can you see yourself on the same side as the people that you described who change sides, that all of a sudden they become, let's say, Democrats again? Because, you know, it happens. Nikita Mikhalkov, to mention the famous Russian movie director, he got Academy Award for his anti-Stalinist film, and now he's the supporter of Putin. People change sides. Do you see yourself with these people in the same room again?
I don't know. Nikita Mikhalkov is a formidable example because this guy, he changed his opinion several times. It wasn't like he being communist and became a Democrat. He was a pro-communist and became a Democrat, and they became a Putin's admirers. So there is no limitation for him. But our characters, they are, I mean, much more honest people, I would say. So I don't think there's such a hypocrites. No. I believe they're much better than Nikita Mikhalkov.
No, I'm not comparing them. What if they change sides?
I'm not sure that if Russia will be free, there would be a lot of opportunities to change side for people who promoted the war.
Yeah, I very much hope so that there would not be such opportunities.
And the very last question, why did you choose these people? Among the colleagues with whom you work, what is the percentage that left or that stayed without supporting the war and Putin, and that are active propagandists?
For one very clear reason, because we are journalists. As journalists, if you write a book, you need to talk to people.
Yeah, of course, but just the percentage.
Percentage of people who
do not belong to this group that are actively promoting
according to different estimates, there are around 1 million people left Russia after the war started. And
No, I'm talking about journalists, your colleagues.
My colleagues, all journalists
most
left.
Most of our colleagues left. People who are real friends of ours, who, remain our friends. Of course, they left. We chose these people because we wanted to show the dark side. We wanted to understand the dark side. There is no, I mean, why to write a book trying to explore our motivation? It's very boring. We've been against Putin from the 2000. I mean, as a book, it would be extremely boring. Nobody would read it, right? We wanted to understand the reasoning behind and motivations of the people who chose to side with Putin.
The question was how many journalists stay in the country?
No. The question was among the people with whom you worked, what is the percentage of those who chose the side of these propagandists, and what is the percentage of those? That was the question.
I don't know. I never count.
I don't know.
Okay.
But among investigative journalists, I think 90% left the country.
Thank you. Okay, questions? The first one. Could you please introduce yourself further?
Ivan Krastev, and I had the pleasure to read the book, and it's really interesting. And the most interesting is that you start talking after not talking for 10 years. And the question is, when you're trying to go for their motivations, were they also trying to write their own version of Our Friends in London? How they have been basically trying to question your motivations, do you believe what you're doing, why you're doing what you're doing? Because one of the most interesting things, at least for me in the book, is you say changing sides. They don't believe that they have changed side.
Right.
They believe that they have been always where there was. And this is why, for me, this is very interesting, which is not in the book, because the book is about them, how they're trying to rationalize what you're doing, what they believe. Do they believe that you're changing sides, or simply believe that you have never been on the same side anyway? So, but it's a really great book, so if you have a possibility, read it. It's not the commercial.
Well, the guy I spoke with, Krutikov, he started our conversation, the very first one, by saying, Andrei, you know, our conversation, it means that actually it hurt my karma. just by speaking with you. So he started in a very aggressive tone, but at the same time, he agreed to talk to me. And I suspect that the reason why Krutikov and Akopov agreed to talk to us was very rational. I don't think that anyone, well, I have some suspicions about Krutikov because he asked so many personal questions, and he always insisted to have my camera being on. So he wanted to understand where we live, the circumstances, and at some point I got really suspicious that maybe somebody asked him, because part of the story that he's been always connected with Russian intelligence agencies, so it was entirely probable that somebody asked him. But now I think he was genuinely curious, and I think the main reason, I don't know, what do you think about Akopov? I think for Krutikov, who been always living in this long shadow of his used to be great family, he wanted to get desperately his place in history. And because he knew from our previous examples that our previous books that people who end up in our books, they sort of get this place. So maybe he just wanted to finally, if not this way, but that way, get his place in Russian history.
On Akopov, a guy who's a leading columnist for pro-Kremlin agency RIA Novosti, I think that he talked to me because he was always very honest, very sincere guy. So he wanted to understand. I explained him. I wanted to understand your reasoning. Why are you doing that? And he said, no, yes, please, let's talk. There is no problem between us. And we have not spoken for 10 years before, but we started the conversation. I think his idea was to talk. We are not our parents. We are much, much more open, and we can't. We don't have this vision of you are enemy. I can talk to you. So he wanted to discuss what's going on, and he wanted to express himself. I think that was his reasoning. It definitely was not for any kind of other things. Yeah.
No.
Thank you. More questions? Go ahead. And then there is one in the back.
Two questions. One
Could
is,
you please introduce yourself?
Oh yeah, Harold Otto. I just a freelance editor living in Vienna. Two questions. One, how is technology changing things, the internet, and the possibility of blogs and other ways of getting around, getting the media? Second question is Masha Gessen and her work, and how does that affect the journalists in Russia? How would they classify her?
Masha Gessen, I knew Masha Gessen for many, many years, and I remember her when I started my career in the newspaper Сегодня. She worked for Itogi, and
the sister publication.
As a sister publication, literally next door. And she was absolutely exceptional back then. She was bold. She was wearing a kind of Central Asian hat, and she looked really, really amazing. That was the first reason I loved her. But the next came her journalism, which is also exceptional.
Well, technology, of course, only thanks to technology we were able to talk to our protagonists. But also, of course, these days, I think technology is what makes our wave of migration so different from all previous waves, because people who left the country in the 70s, the way they left the country, they would say goodbye to their relatives and friends forever. And we were able to exchange maybe one letter in a year. Phone calls were almost completely forbidden. You can have your phone call for 3 minutes. What are you going to talk about for 3 minutes? It's absolutely useless. We, of course, on the other hand, we are in constant touch with people in Moscow. And still, of course, every day. But it creates another problem, is that you just walk the streets of London and you are deep in a conversation with someone in Moscow. And immediately you feel yourself that you are in Moscow. And it's really difficult, I mean, emotionally, psychologically, because you need to you need to understand where you are. And I think so many crises in our life these days are connected to the sense of identity. And again, for instance, just to give you one example, 100 years ago, when we had, well, a formidable and excellent Joseph Conrad, who started writing in English when he settled in the UK, he became immediately an English writer. We've been writing our books in English and live in London. Does it make us English writers? Of course not. We are Russian writers. We are Russian journalists. Because of this connection, because of this technology, because we still have it. So it changes everything. And to what extent, it remains to be seen.
There was a question in the back. And then one here, yeah.
Good evening. My name is Louis Durno. I work for European Democracy Consulting. First, I wanted to say, I don't know if Mr. Rajan is still with us. I wanted to say thank you for your pieces. They brought me to tears earlier, and that was wonderful. My question to you, the portrait that you present of Russian intelligentsia is rather grim, and you don't seem particularly optimistic for the future. I was wondering whether in a post-Putin future, you would nevertheless see a space for you to go back to Russia to carry out your work. Thank you.
Oh, of course, we are very hopeful to be back to Russia. And today is the darkest moment of the Russian history, so it's very, very difficult to foresee the future. But there is a future, and my parents, they have never believed that they could travel abroad or just that the Soviet Union would collapse. But they saw the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was a much stronger system than the Kremlin state now. So we are very hopeful. Let's see.
Here, there was, yeah.
Thank you. My name is Irina Borogan, School of Civic Education. I also wanted to thank organizer and Desi and Vikram. I think if we're aiming at the full experience of our reality, we won't go far without art. So it was really, really powerful, and the idea is powerful. And I'm a big fan of Irina and Andrei, and we go back. And I read all the previous books, but not this one. I'm looking forward to that. And my question is about ideology. The people you talk to are well-versed. They're well-educated. And the question of ideology remains unanswered, because if we would withdraw this longing for this long shadow of the victory in the Second World War, there will be literally nothing to build the justification for this aggression inside the society. So everybody understands that. And people are arguing, so whether the so-called Russism can be called an ideology, because apparently from the political science point of view, it's actually not, because it lacks foundation. So these educated people, what do they think about the ideology? Because still longing for their ancestors, predecessors' greatness is sort of lame. They should be aiming at something bigger. So have they ever mentioned? Maybe it's in the book, and if you can briefly answer that.
If we can call that ideology, all of them share an extremely, extremely dark vision of Russia. Which is
Could you please explain what you mean by a dark vision of Russia?
They believe, actually, when they talk about these things, they use the terminology you would use in the 19th century, that you have great powers, they fight each other, Russia on the losing side, and most of these people we talked to, at some critical, for instance, he was absolutely sure that the next really big war is coming, like tomorrow. So he has this very dark vision of the future and of the future of Russia. At the same time, they believe that Russia as a country is a very special kind of country which cannot be compared to any democracies, cannot be a democracy, could be ruled only by a dictator. And just to give you a really fascinating example is what Olga Lyubimova once posted. And that was at the time of the Moscow protests in 2011, 2012. She had a very honest blog on LiveJournal. Back then, it was the most popular bloggers platform in the country. And she had a blog which was not extremely popular, but because of that post, it became quite a thing. She posted what she called the Manifesto of Lyubimova. And in this manifesto, she says, I see lots of my friends from Jean-Jacques, we all know what it is, a very famous Russian restaurant, where, well, mostly Moscow restaurant where you could find all Russian liberals and journalists and whatever. All my friends from Jean-Jacques now are going to the streets to protest. I don't understand that. I don't see the point. I long accepted, and we are talking about a woman, she was, back then was probably 25 years old. And she wrote, I long accepted a concept that in a country like Russia, you can behave only as a woman being raped. You just need to spread your legs and try to enjoy it. This is a woman who is now the Minister of Culture. So she is in charge of defining Russian ideology. So she has an idea that in a country like Russia, you just need to accept inevitable and try to make the best of it. And if you're ambitious enough, you have no choice but to work for the guy who actually rules your country. And it doesn't matter, even if he's a war criminal, doesn't matter, because it's your only chance to make something out of your life. That's it, the end of story. That is the ideology.
Thank you. Here, and then Klemena. Please go ahead, yeah.
My name is Jakub Staubmann. I'm an Austrian journalist. I work for 3 digital media. One of them is the United Nations. What I would like to ask you is, I was working for 5 years in Ukraine as a professor for public administration. And once I give a lecture there about the relationship between Ukraine and Russia. My opinion was at the time that Ukraine should talk to Russian. Maybe this will avoid any conflicts in the future because they know Russian very well. They live together for a long time. And after that, it didn't happen. Do you think that if Ukrainian really talk to Russia, we could avoid the war? This is my first question. The second question is how or what the Russians are thinking about what Russian army did in Syria and Chechnya.
Okay, if I can, you can start.
I mean, the answer for your first question is obvious because we talked together. Ukrainians talked to Russian a lot before the war started. And people traveled back and forth, and there were not a lot of problem between them. On the level of everyday lives, everyone talked to each other. But the Kremlin started this terrible war. And so talking wasn't helpful. Because when you have the regime in your country, and even you are an average citizen and you are against the war, you can protest because otherwise you would put to prison. It wasn't very helpful talking to each other. No, it was not. It's not a conflict between Ukrainians and Russians like people. It's a conflict between the Kremlin and it's the Kremlin's crazy ideas about the place of Ukraine, about the place of Ukrainian people, and about its own place in the global world.
Yeah, it's like to think that 2014 annexation of Crimea was about NATO or Crimea. It was not about that. But just Putin got really paranoid about the Maidan revolution. He sent his spies to fix the problem. They failed, and he thought, well, now I have only one solution, the military solution to the problem. I need to send them the signal that no color revolutions would be tolerated anymore because that would create a problem for me. So he was talking basically to himself. It's about his fears, about his sense of political fragility of the regime. It's not about what the Ukrainians could say or what they could explain is about the situation. It was not about that.
Thank you. Klemena?
There was a second question
there was about the army.
Serbia and Chechnya.
Not Serbia, Syria.
Syria, sorry. To be honest, I think we need to think more about these wars now, because, for instance, just to give you one example, there was a very famous Russian human rights organization, very active at the time of the Chechen wars. It was called Soldiers' Mothers. And we all praised this organization. We always loved them because we believed they said something against the war, because we wanted to get their sons back to the normal life. And only now, after the war in Ukraine started, lots of people started thinking, wow, these guys, these women, they never actually talked about Chechens. They always talked about their sons. So it was always one-sided story. So maybe, unfortunately, there is still a lot for us to process and to understand about what the country thinks and what society thinks about the army and what they did in places like Syria or Chechnya.
Thank you. Klemena?
Thanks. Well, everyone seems to be asking two questions, so I'll ask two questions, very short ones though. You know, when I read your book, I noticed, this may be completely by chance, but still I'm interested if there was a certain reason for it. People very often talk about the relationship between Russia and the West, You hear on Russian media and so on, the collective West and all the rest of it. And in your book, you seem to talk much more about Russia and Europe. So I wonder if there's a reason for that. So this is the first question. And the second question is that because the book reads as a story that spans over these more than 2 decades, you sort of expect that it is a story about this growing authoritarianism and how the regime started from a certain point where there was a prospect of democracy and so on. And gradually it changed in certain ways that made it more and more authoritarian. But at the same time, I think that the way I read your book, I understand what you say as all the signs were there from the very beginning. They just weren't very obvious. People didn't pay attention. For me, it's also the West didn't pay attention. You know, the Chechen war happened, 300,000 people were killed. In the meantime, George Bush was looking in the eyes of Putin and he found the Russian soul there and so on. So actually I understand what you're saying as, it's not so much a transformation and something that there was an evolution over time from more democratic to less democratic and so on. But it was like that from the very beginning. We just didn't see it. So, yeah, these are my two questions.
Good question. I can talk about Europe. You can, or if you want to talk.
What was your first question?
Oh, okay. I can take it. I can take it about Europe.
If you use Russia and Europe, Russia versus Europe, the relationship between Russia and Europe, much more than Russia and the West.
Because Russian was always crazy about Europe because they still know a lot about France, Italy. France was very important for the Russian culture and for the Russian literature in the 19th century. They know a lot about the United Kingdom, but it's not about the United States. United States always been like a very distant place, and people know a lot of myth about that, but European countries, European culture, Russia is a part of Europe, and Russian culture only emerged thanks to the European culture. So, and it developed so fast, and it produced such a great literature and music only because they own it a lot from Europe. So that's why we put Europe and Russia against each other and put them together.
I could add that according to most of the polls we had from Levada Center, apparently ordinary Russians, they are more emotional about Europe than about the United States. And when they ask it, they always say something about untraditional values and gays and LGBTQ problems in Europe, and that Europe is under control of LGBTQ mafia, whatever. And they feel very emotional about it, much more emotional than about the United States. So it's still the case. About your early science, yes, absolutely, you're absolutely right. And I think in our first book we wrote that actually the resurgence of the KGB started long before Putin came to power. Already in 1995, coincidentally, when Yeltsin started his war in Chechnya, and when he realized that he couldn't rely on a small, efficient counterintelligence agency, he needed something much bigger, he changed the rules. He made the FSK, which was Federal Service of Counterintelligence, into FSB, which means security, a much broader term, which actually could mean anything. He made this big change. The FSB was given more and more powers back. They got back their prisons, the right to prosecute political dissidents, and that happened long before Putin came to power. And again, I mean, before Putin, Yeltsin had a lineup of potential successors, and all of these people happened to be from the security services. Stepashin, Primakov, all of these guys were somehow connected with security services. Not just Putin, it didn't start with Putin, unfortunately.
Thank you. I have three people here, but please short questions. Start here with you. No, here in the first row first, please.
Herr Vikala, I'm with Austria Press Agency. I would like to ask you one question about your responsibility. Do you feel some kind of responsibility that your friends became what they became? For example, Akopov taking an interview with Shivkunov in some kind of 2002 is a different story than writing this piece he wrote in February 2022, which was about genocide of Ukrainians, basically.
Thank you. We shall collect three questions. So there is the lady with glasses, and then in the back.
Hi, I'm Maya Sotes. I'm a leadership coach, but I've been working in international organizations. My question is around you living now in Europe and looking at what's going on politically and your experience with Russia. What do you see in terms of democracy, in terms of autocracy, and what would be your advice to people like me, for example, in the Western world?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The lady, yeah.
Katarzyna Wężyk, I'm a Polish journalist. You mentioned nostalgia for the superpower. Could you elaborate a little bit more? Because USSR was superpower, but not the one well known for standards of living or its citizens or commitment to civil rights or even life of its citizens. So to what extent being a superpower compensates for it all? And to what extent this is a problem only for 60 plus people, or this is something which is inherited? You have this nostalgia for superpower also among 20 or 30 somethings.
Thank you.
Okay.
So we have three questions.
Responsibility.
To be honest, I don't feel I'm not going to take any responsibility for what our dear friends in Moscow are doing, because they're not my children and they're older than me, and I couldn't change them. I tried. I discussed. I talked about everything with them, and I tried to oppose them, but I'm not responsible for their behavior.
About advice to the Western societies, I think one thing we sometimes forget is that how many Russian intellectuals supported Putin from the day one. And the reason why they did that, they wanted two things. They believed in the idea that the country needed to get fixed, and they wanted to make the country great again, if you can use this language. And also they believed that if they can get access to Putin, the institution doesn't matter. They helped a lot and contributed a lot to the destruction of the Russian institutions. They were already very weak. But I remember that many of our former colleagues, they praised Putin's attack on Russian television, for instance, because they believed that that would be a way for them personally, to get access to Putin, and then maybe to give him a good advice. Maybe, I mean, the problem is that they, at the end of the day, they won some time, but all of them inevitably lost. And one of my questions to Krutikov was always, and I think that makes things really comparable to what is going on in the United States. I mean, his people who actually believe in the same thing he believes, they've been in power for 25 years, and still he has this huge grudge against liberal media. He still believes that somehow...
And there are no more liberal media.
No more liberal media, but he still has this big idea that culture in the country, the public space in the country, is under control of the liberals. And at some point I just asked him, don't you think that at the end of the day, because of the way you treated this situation, all of us, pro-Kremlin journalists and anti-Kremlin journalists, we all lost access to power, we all lost our influence, speaking cynically, and he agreed to that. He said, yes, but it's you to blame. So for him, it was just like that. And the third question was?
And the third question was Russia being a great power. With,
why it's so important? Look, again,
with low living standards.
I agree that it's not so important for the younger generation, but the point is that the Kremlin sell this superpower status under the cover of nationalism and Russian superiority, Russian people being superior to Ukrainians, to Belarusians, to other people who live in neighboring countries, and unfortunately that works.
To be honest, I think it's also about younger generation. We had this episode in the book when we realized that the military pride became a very important thing. Immediately after the war in 2008 started, we had several meetings with people who were in their early 20s, and we're quite successful in business. So we are not talking about officials or bureaucrats, people on the payroll of the government. They were just IT people in Moscow. And all of a sudden, most of them told us the same thing. But finally, we feel we are great that it is the time to feel proud of the Russian army. Finally, we get it back. So all of a sudden, we made this conclusion in the book that maybe because they already became relatively wealthy, so we needed and demanded for something more, and now we wanted to feel proud of themselves, of their country, and finally of the army. And Putin understood that. Maybe it's just one of the explanations, but it was there.
Well, last question, very short. No, because we have passed the time.
My name's Sarah Waring. I'm an editor at Eurozine. You mentioned this dark vision and that it's associated with the expectation that war will be even further escalated, something much bigger. And my question relates to the recent militarization, the use of provocative military action in places like Denmark, Poland recently. Could you suggest, given your awareness of Russian ideology, the way that the mind is currently working, how to respond to that without further provocation from a European side?
It's the most difficult question because there is no, seriously, because the thing is that the Western powers and Western security services or the governments, they are facing with something new coming from Russia. They always tend to look at the history of the Cold War because they believe that they can find some template there. The problem is that with this kind of tactics, with sabotage operations, there is no such a template because the KGB, although it was the most aggressive intelligence agency in the world probably, they never activated a sabotage option in Europe during the Cold War. Nobody knows how to respond to that. It is a problem. And that is why Western governments, they are just learning on the way. How successful it could be, I just don't know.
On this such a positive note, and before I close and ask for a big applause, where can the audience buy this book?
I think Amazon is still well alive, so it should be.
So the American Amazon to buy the book about Russia.
Yeah.
The book was published by an American publisher. It's Hachette, so.
Yeah. What are you going to say? Yeah.
Well, I thank you so much for this great book, for this great discussion, and since we are in a press club, investigative journalism matters, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us here. Thank you.